All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me here this afternoon for my talk on So You've Built a Great Dashboard, Now What? If you read the title of as How to Build a Great Dashboard, that's not what this is going to be about. There's lots of great sessions here at Tableau for that. But today's session is really going to be why great dashboards are sometimes not as effective as we hoped or thought they would be, and things we can do as designers to mitigate those and ensure that our dashboards are as powerful and as effective as they deserve to be. So I want to start with a quick introduction about myself. I work for ExxonMobil. I'm not going to spend too much time introducing the company. I think most of the folks in the room are fairly familiar with what we do. We're an integrated multinational oil and gas company. And what I do is I support the safety, security, health, and environmental team. And what my job is to help make the data in that area more accessible to all of our users around the globe. And you can think about sort of the implications of trying to make this data widely available. We have this really rich set of incidents that are occurring around the world, how our environmental performance is doing. And if we're in a place to put that into a data warehouse, build dashboards on it, so that all of our personnel around the world can consume that data, learn from it, and then hopefully prevent a future incident from happening, that is incredibly powerful. So that sort of ties into my talk in terms of really making sure these dashboards are being penetrated throughout your usership to the extent that they need to be in order to be effective. So some quick hit Tableau chops. I've been working almost every day for 3 years within the application. This is my second Tableau conference, so excited to be back. And it's actually my fifth time getting to have an opportunity to speak at a conference on behalf of Tableau. But there's a little caveat there. It's my first time doing it alone, which is a good thing and a bad thing, and I'll tell you why it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because, for obvious reasons, I don't have two guys up on stage to throw me a life preserver when I say something dumb or blatantly false. But it's a good thing because I always present with the same two guys, and they are very follically blessed. They have these very impressive beards. And they love to point out that I am less follically blessed when we're up on stage together, to the point that they made me wear a fake beard the last time we presented. And it wasn't a good fake. I'm the one in the middle, in case you couldn't tell. So it was pretty egregious. So I'm glad to be up here, and I don't have to be ashamed to be clean-shaven today. All right, so you've built a great dashboard. Now what? I want to take a quick straw poll. Who here in the audience, and this is not the time to be modest, who here in the audience has built a great dashboard at some point in their Tableau career? Come on, raise them up high. I see my two coworkers seeing who can raise their hands highest. So I want you to leave them up if that dashboard was not as effective from a usership or a feedback standpoint as you thought it was going to be. So most of the hands stayed up. I know I've definitely been in that situation, so go ahead and relax. So why do great dashboards fail, right? Is it a issue of not understanding the design requirements? Maybe we don't understand what our customers are actually wanting. Maybe we used a donut chart when we really should have used the bar chart. Maybe it's not being able to understand the metrics within the dashboard and being unclear on what the actual user is trying to consume. I don't think that's the case, and at least that's not been the case in my experience. It's not because the dashboard itself has anything inherently wrong with it. It's because of all the things that we do around the dashboard in terms of marketing it, making sure the users can easily access it, making sure they have mechanisms to provide feedback on it that aren't necessarily in place to maximize the value of that dashboard. So that's really what we're going to talk about today, is how to avoid those pitfalls to make sure all these great tools that you're pouring your heart and soul into are getting the usership they deserve and they're as effective as they deserve. All right, so I want to start with a little story. It's about the French national rail carrier, SNCF. Don't ask me what that stands for. And back in 2014, they decided that a lot of their regional trains needed a refresh. So they decided to invest 16 billion euros, it was roughly $20 billion at the time, into revamping or purchasing new trains and carriages. And they did a big study, as any company would, to understand what the market wanted. And they looked at the carriages that were currently popular throughout the rest of Europe, and they identified certain creature comforts that they needed to add, better seats that were ergonomic, certain lighting conditions, nice big windows so that you can get this beautiful view, Wi-Fi on board, and then they did the same thing for the engines, making sure that they were clean and efficient, and a huge advantage over the existing model. So they invested all this money, and they bought 2,000 new trains, and they started rolling them out, and they realized there was just one small, tiny problem. They didn't fit in any of the stations in France. Yeah. So it wasn't really a small problem. It was kind of a major problem, and it wound up being a 50 billion problem that they had to go back in and actually cut the platforms at all these stations in France in order for these trains to fit. And the disconnect was between the rail provider, SNCF, and the manufacturer of the trains, and they never really connected. And I really think this is a nice equation to building a dashboard. Building a great dashboard without a clear path or understanding of how your users are going to get to it and access it, it's a lot like building a train without a station. So my goal for today is to make sure that all of you have stations for your dashboards. So we encountered a stationless train, so to speak, at Exxon when we started to roll out some of our She dashboards. So we had multiple dashboards that sit on different projects and different sites within our Tableau server. Our users are not necessarily overly familiar with Tableau, so requiring them to need to navigate to one server for a particular dashboard and then jump to a different site for another dashboard was not very optimized from a user experience standpoint. So we wanted to really come up with what we called one-stop shopping. If our users wanted to consume anything that my team was putting out from an analytics perspective, we wanted to give them one place to go and one place only to go. So what we came up with was what we call our content management portal, or our dashboard of dashboards, DoD for short. It also stands for Discovery on Demand, but we like to think it's the dashboard of dashboards. And I'm going to show you here in just a moment what that looks like. But what it was we took all of our dashboards that sit on all these different sites and all these different projects, and we packaged them using Tableau into an interactive menu that had everything in one place. Users could very quickly navigate across the different dashboards, see which each one entailed, and then click to it and navigate to a live version of that tool. And this was all done in Tableau using base level functionality. So with that, my MC Hammer reference, it's demo time. So I'm going to jump over to Tableau here. Just bear with me a second. All right, so I'm not showing you our own data. What I did was I went onto Tableau Public and I selected 10 dashboards, 10 of the top 10, as well as a few of the other ones that I really liked, to simulate what we need to do in order to create this content management portal. So imagine you have multiple dashboards and you're trying to package them into this nice interactive menu using Tableau. The first thing you need to do is set up your data source, which is pretty straightforward. It doesn't need to be more complicated than containing the information that you need for your users. So this just shows you what it looks like in Tableau, and I can actually show you the Excel. So it's very straightforward, but all I did was add a few columns, number, which allows me to sort of sort the dashboards later on in Tableau, the name of the dashboards, and let me scroll in a little bit so y'all can see who the dashboard designer was. So these are all Tableau Public dashboard designers. A nice little vignette description. This is what this dashboard contains. This is the metrics contained within, so that my users know exactly what they're navigating to before they click on it. The year the dashboard was published, a little topic category. I tagged some keywords. And then the last component, which is very important, the URL to that particular dashboard, which is going to be crucial when we go to that navigation piece. All right, so let's go back over to Tableau. All right, so connected to my Excel data source. And step 2 was I wanted to add a visual element, right? So a picture's worth 1,000 words. You can give the user, a link to your dashboard, or you can show them this nice thumbnail that kind of draws them in. Especially when we're talking about some of these great dashboards on Tableau Public. They're colorful, they really draw the eye, so you want to maximize that asset. So what I did was I took all these dashboards and I took screenshots, and you could either take screenshots using a tool like Snagit, or you could export using the PNG functionality in Tableau, and I just put them all into a PowerPoint and just resize them so that they were all the same, so you can see all of my icons. And then what I did is I added them to my custom shape file. And I'm sure a lot of you are using custom shapes, but some of you may not be. And you don't have to just use the custom shapes for shapes. You can use it for pictures as well. So what I did was I added these to my Tableau repository file, and I'll show you where these are. Right now it's on my desktop. If I go into my Tableau repository and go to shapes, you can see all of the default settings that come out of the box with Tableau. But then you can also add your own folder, and I called it Tableau Public Top 10. And then I just imported all of these pictures or all of these thumbnails as pictures into that folder. You do have to close Tableau and then relaunch it once you do that. But once I did that, I then dragged, let me take you to the actual sheet. I then dragged the name of the dashboard to a column, and then I put name on shape. And this is a little tedious, but what I did was I found my Tableau public top 10, and I just tagged the shape to the corresponding dashboard title. So it's really helpful to make sure that your dashboard thumbnails are the same name as the titles, and then it's a really quick process to associate the right one with the right title. So that's what I did there. So that was step 2. Step 3 was I built out the visualization, and I decided that for this particular one, sort of a 5x2 was the best layout. You can see in the top right, what I did was I created a parameter that allows me to choose the number of columns. So if I decided that actually a 2x5 worked better, I could reorient that, but I like that 5x2. And then I dropped 2 calculated fields on columns and rows. So the one on columns, and I'm not going to get into the weeds on the math, but essentially what it does is it looks at the total number of columns, and then that number field within my data source, it divides it, and then it knows to put in the appropriate column. And it uses a function called the mod function, which takes the remainder, and then it knows where to go. So I don't want to get too into the math. You can come see me after if you have a math-specific question, and I'll pass you off on my colleague who has a much better math brain than myself. So, okay. Same thing with rows. So now what I've done is I've laid out all of my thumbnails, and I can just add some additional formatting to make this dashboard of dashboards a lot more valuable to my end user. So I'm going to jump back over to the next tab, and you can see what I've done is I've started to clean it up. So added some shading, I added the titles, and then the most important thing was I added a tooltip. So a thumbnail is great, but it doesn't really tell you the whole picture before you click on that button. So I added this little executive summary, so to speak, with the title and the designer. And this is actually a dashboard that my colleague's daughter, 9-year-old daughter, designed. So if you want to feel bad about your Tableau skills, check out this dashboard because it's more advanced than I could do. And she's 9, by the way. So it's a humbling experience. But these little vignettes allow your users to quickly see what each dashboard has within it before they click on it. So it keeps them in the menu, making sure that they've chosen the right tool for the job before they click that button. So step 5 is adding a dashboard action. So you just bring on the action, and I'll show you what that looks like. So if we go to Dashboard, Actions, and we edit it, I just brought in my URL field as a select. So when my users go in and they click on this dashboard, it'll open Internet Explorer. Helps if you're connected to the internet, which I'm not. But they'll go in and be able to see that particular dashboard. And then the last thing what I did was I just finalized the look and feel, added a nice title, made sure it was laid out appropriately, and then this dashboard is published to Tableau Public. So at the end of the presentation, there'll be a QRC as well as a bit.ly address, so that if you're interested in seeing sort of the inner workings of this dashboard, you'll be able to download it, and you can recreate your own dashboard of dashboards. So with that, I'm going to jump back over. So in terms of making sure you're picking the right approach from one of these content management portals, there's a lot that you can do. So what I showed you is not necessarily the right approach for your organization or implementation. It's just to give you a sense of some of the things you need to think about when you're presenting these end user tools. So you can go with something way less technical where maybe you have a SharePoint site and you just list all your dashboards out with a little description on a SharePoint list, and that's a nice way to sort of package everything in one place. We did something sort of in the middle from a technical perspective. We did this embedded dashboard menu using out-of-the-box functionality within Tableau. And you can see it did not take me long to recreate that, and it does not take our team very much effort every time we add a dashboard to keep that particular tool up to date. And then the last thing the last option is you could do something very, very complex, something with Java APIs or something much more complex. We didn't have that particular skill set within our team, so we opted for something a little bit more in the middle. So there's no right answer. It's really balancing your technical skill set that you have within your organization with what you want to present to your end user. So this is what our content management portal looks like. So we took that dashboard of dashboards and we plugged it into a SharePoint site with some additional ancillary pieces that we knew our users wanted. So again, this goes back to that concept of one-stop shopping, right? We want them to be able to go to one place and they get every single tool or piece of information they need out of that portal. So it's a customer-facing SharePoint site. It's the central location of all dashboards. And this is what I just showed you. That's what we used that Discovery on Demand or that dashboard of dashboards to create. It's got an announcement page, so this is how we cascade information out to our usership. It's got a listing of all of our contacts related to our dashboarding program so they knew who to reach out to with questions or comments. It's got a really nice, easy-to-use form, which I'll show you a little bit later, to submit feedback or requests for additional tools or fixes. And then it's got links to training and additional resources. Additionally, UX doesn't necessarily just stop with sort of these ancillary pieces. You want to make sure you're connected back to your dashboards and that the tools have this really seamless sort of collaboration between your portal and the actual in tool. So we did some things. These are just a few sort of quick hits of ways we designed user experience into our dashboards. So one of the things we encountered was a lot of our users had never used Tableau before. And we didn't want them to get to a dashboard and then ask, wait, how do I export this? How do I filter? We didn't want them to leave that tool and then potentially never go back to it. So we embedded some how-to links directly in the dashboard as the front page. And one of our colleagues actually made these really effective vignettes, and they're short little videos that say, this is how you filter on a dashboard. This is how you export it as a PDF. This is how you save a custom view. And that allows the user to get the piece of information they need to use the tool effectively in the tool that they're actually using. The second thing that we did was we had this sense of navigation that is consistent across all of our tools. So you can see the little I button and then the little home icon on that middle right picture. The I button is an about this dashboard, so that if a user has a question about how a metric was calculated or what a particular chart is showing, they click that I button, it takes them to the About This Dashboard page, and they don't have to question where the data is coming from or how a particular calculation was put in place. And then the Home button takes them back to our portal, so back to that Discovery on Demand site. So we're finding that our users were really good at navigating to the dashboards, but then when they wanted to find a different tool, it was a pain to go back to the original portal to find a different tool. So that Home button brings them back home. And then the third thing we did was sort of kind of hacking our users a little bit, but we noticed a real sense of impatience on one of our tools that had a tremendous amount of data. So what would happen is they'd click on the link and they'd get the spinny wheel. And what it was doing is it was trying to render all the visualizations and load all the data at the same time while running the query. So users would sit there, and they'd sit there, and they'd sit there, and of course they wouldn't wait patiently. They would eventually get frustrated and then close it and never go back to that tool. So we found that if we put a very simple calculated field in place that hid all of the data on every visualization, the first thing that would happen is sort of some of the images, the title, the filters would start to load up as soon as they clicked that button. So they thought, yeah, something's happening. And then they clicked Enable Dashboards, and all of the data would populate. So from clicking on the link to getting to the data, it was the same amount of time as before, but we tricked them into thinking things were starting to load sooner than they were. And that really kept them a little bit more trusting of the tool and thinking that something was working in the back end. All right, so when we're talking about user experience and we want to make sure that we're maximizing the value of the dashboards, there's three sort of things that we need to keep in mind. The first one is you need to define your user's experience. And I'm going to go on to the next slide here in a moment and point out 4 questions you need to ask yourself to make sure you understand who your user is and how they're going to interact with a particular tool. The second thing, and I think as designers we're particularly bad at it, I know I'm certainly bad at this, is marketing and communicating. So I think we have this tendency when we get a requirement list from a customer, we build the dashboard, we're proud of it, we publish it, we send a link, we're done. Move on to the next dashboard. But we really need to be advocates and ambassadors for these tools that we're putting out. And the best way to do that is to market and communicate. So make sure your users are aware of these tools. Make sure they're hitting the audience that they were intended for. And then the last thing is making sure that you have a framework and a culture for continuous feedback. So our job with these tools and these dashboards is never really done. You need to think of it as a continuous improvement process and as an iterative process. So you always need to be listening to your users and make sure that they feel like they're heard and appreciated. You need to be incorporating their feedback where appropriate, and then you need to be repeating the cycle again and again. So in terms of defining your user's experience, there's 4 key questions I think we need to ask. So the first one is, how will users find my dashboards, right? This might seem like an easy one, but it's something that we had to ask ourselves because telling our users just to go to our Tableau server address was not sustainable. They would have gotten lost in there with a lot of clutter. So that's where we came up with the dashboard of dashboards, was in answering this question. The second question is, how will I communicate with my users? So this might seem like a pretty straightforward one, but if you're from a bigger organization like I am, Getting out to all of your user base is not as easy as just composing an email and sending it to a listserv or a distribution list. You need to make sure that your communication is very targeted so that your users don't get overwhelmed by it, but that they get the information that they need. But it's not a one-way street, so that third point is how will users communicate with me? So do your users have a very clearly defined channel to providing feedback back to you, or are they going to get frustrated trying to hunt down the dashboard designer of a particular tool? And the fourth question, do users need training, which I also like to think of, could my mom use it? And generally the answer is no, because she's not tech savvy. But do users need training? So are your tools so intuitive, and do they have the right training in place that your users could go to a tool without you standing over your shoulder and saying, no, 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 click there, don't click there, or do they actually need some sort of guidance? So let's go down into these a little bit more. So how will users find my dashboards? 3 questions you need to ask. So did you make it easy to navigate to? So with our Discovery on Demand site, we used a bit.ly that allows our users to type in essentially 3 letters into our internal web address, hit enter, and they're in our Discovery on Demand portal. So you really want to cut down any kind of extra clicking or navigation that your users have to do to get from their portal or from wherever they are to the end user tool. Do they know which tools to use? So this really goes back to defining that really nice descriptive menu with hover over functionality. Is it clear that they use this tool for this particular metric and that tool for that metric, or are there potentially 5 screwdrivers and they don't know which one to use? So really make sure that when you're putting together one of these portals or some sort of mechanism to access these dashboards, it's very clear that what each tool does and the metrics that they contain within them. And then the last question is, did you make it easy to return from? So I hinted at this a little bit earlier, but you don't want to get in a position where your users get to a dashboard and they want to get back to your portal and they're not able to do so. So make sure there's that continuous navigation cycle. So second component is, how will I communicate with my users? Have you established with your users a framework for communication? So do your users know that you're always going to be contacting them through the announcement page on your SharePoint site? Are you always going to be contacting them through email or through your internal social media? Or is it always through a meeting? Whatever it is, both you and your users need to sort of agree upon what that mechanism is so everybody knows what the marketplace is for information. What tools will you use? So this just goes back to email, internal social media, word of mouth, viral marketing, lots of different tools. And then how often? So do your users know that they're going to be communicated with on a weekly basis about what you're doing from an analytics and a dashboarding perspective, or is it going to be monthly? How will users communicate with you? So again, do users know who to reach out to with a particular question or a comment, or are they going to interact with the dashboard and say, this was really good, I want to tell the designer that they need to tweak this, and then get frustrated because they can't find who that particular individual is? So is it very clear who they need to reach out to for help and questions? And this goes with question number 2, are there tools required to facilitate that? Do you need to build some sort of feedback list or mechanism in order to make sure you're capturing that, logging it, responding to it appropriately? And then that 4th question, do users need training? Could someone who has never used Tableau use your tool? So again, I always ask myself, could my mom use the tool? And usually the answer is no, so I have to be really descriptive with what each button does. And then what kind of training is required? So if users do need training, is it as simple as linking to the already existing external Tableau resources? Or is it potentially linking to a video that you've created in-house? So what you can do is, this is a sort of a simplified exercise that you can do to assess how well you answered these questions and how well your portal or your content management system is set up to exemplify the user experience. So what we've done here is we took a piece of masking tape and we put it on the desk, and there's a quarter on top of it. And what you can do is you sit your users down in front of the computer, and you say, I'm going to give you some steps. I want to see how you feel interacting with this tool that I built for you. So I'm going to have you do a few things, navigate to a dashboard, click a few things in the dashboard, maybe provide some feedback on it. And all the quarter is intended to do is I want you to tell me how that particular step makes you feel. So if it makes you feel like it was really easy and it's very clear what you're trying to do here, move the quarter up. That made you feel happy. If it made you feel really frustrating, move the quarter down. And I want to know how that made you feel. And since we're in Vegas, maybe the quarter's not the most appropriate thing. So there we go, poker chip. So first thing you do is you say, OK, I want you to navigate to the dashboard portal. And the user clicks on a link, or they use that little shortened bit.ly that you provided to them, and they say, that was really easy. I could get to the portal, no problem. So that made me feel pretty good. So the second thing I want you to do is I want you to find a dashboard that does this. And they have to sort of hunt and peck a little bit, and they're not sure if that dashboard's the right one to answer the question or this dashboard's the right one to answer the question. So that frustrates them a little bit, so they sort of move it down to neutral again. I want you to open this dashboard. So they click on it, they finally find the right one, and that made them feel really good. This is a beautiful tool that you've created. This dashboard has all the right metrics, the filters are easy to use. Clearly, you didn't have any problem with the dashboard piece. Third thing you do is you say, I want you to get back to the portal, and I want you to find a different dashboard. Well, they don't see a button to get back to the portal, and they close the first window. So now they're frustrated because they're stuck on this dashboard that they no longer need. And then you say, okay, well, I see you're frustrated. I want you to provide some feedback to us on that. And the last thing they do is they try to find a feedback form, or they try to find somebody to contact, and they can't. So what you want to take away from this is you had a really effective tool. When they were actually using the dashboard, their experience and their happiness peaked, right? It was as high as it was throughout the whole experience. But the lasting taste that they are going to leave with is negative. So the likelihood of them wanting to use your tool again or interacting with your tool is relatively low. So we really need to make sure we're thinking about this user experience holistically, and we're not just focusing on the piece in the middle, because generally we don't have a problem with that. All right, so component number 2, marketing and communicating. So I talked a little bit about this earlier, but you want to make sure that you and your users contract a shared understanding of communication. So make sure that they're aware of how you're going to communicate and you've landed on the best possible solution. And there's no one right answer for every organization. It really depends on the size of your team, who your users are, how dispersed your organization is. But you could do something more on the push side from an email and a presentation standpoint. Maybe, the only users are within a small radius, and you can do a very quick presentation to make them aware of a dashboard that you're rolling out. Or maybe they're dispersed very internationally and globally, but it's a set number of people, so you can send them an email. Alternatively, you can be more on the pull side of the spectrum, where you have something along the lines of a central resource site where they go and they consume the information and go out and seek it themselves. Maybe they can subscribe to a subscription list that automatically generates an email or gives them an alert every time something changes. So lots of options, and there's no right answer. And this is not exhaustive by any means. So what tools will we use for marketing? So do you want to use developed content, things like signage, videos, web banners, or do you want to use more word-of-mouth type tools, sort of viral or guerrilla marketing campaigns, maybe internal social media tools? Or one thing that I've seen is very effective is just a link to your portal and an email signature that says, hey, check out my dashboards, click right here under my name. So again, lots of different options in terms of being effective with our marketing. And the last thing is how will you go back and check yourself to make sure you're doing all these things that you promised and you're doing an effective job of delivering on that user experience. So you can do things that are very rigid, like usage data if you're using the PostgreSQL, or doing analytics on who your users are and how frequently they're consuming a dashboard. Or you can do more sort of satisfaction type reviews, so looking at direct user feedback, surveys, observations, so really interacting with your users and understanding what items are working and what items are not working. So some of these things that we did in place to answer these questions, we made sure we had clear channels for communication. So you can see our announcement page. We limited it to the 3 most recent, and then we have a one-click subscription for our users. So we tell anybody that want to interact with our dashboards, go to this subscription menu, click subscribe, and then every time we roll out a new tool, we say, this dashboard is now available. They're going to get an email to their inbox. Or our Tableau server is undergoing maintenance. It's going to be down for a day. They get an email to their inbox. And we've just cut down a tremendous amount of work for our team to do to make sure that our users are staying informed. You want to make your contacts easy to hunt down. So you don't want anybody guessing who a dashboard owner is or who they need to reach out to for questions or comments or feedback. So what we did is we created a really easy contact menu with a send email button that generates a pre-composed email. And then I'm not sure how I feel about the send IM, but if you click send IM, it launches our internal IM window with my name in it, and people can ping me and say, hey, this dashboard isn't working right now, or I think you want to calculate this particular metric in this way. So a really great way for our users to know sort of who the point of contact is. And then the last thing is you need to make sure your users have a voice. And the best way to do that is to listen to their feedback and make sure they feel like it's valued and appreciated. So we created this really simple feedback form where users can go in. They have one box to fill out. There's not 10 questions to provide feedback. They say, hey, this dashboard isn't working. You need to go and address it. We get an email every time somebody submits this, and we're able to be very responsive to our users. So that third component of effective dashboard design and making sure these great dashboards are being utilized to the extent that they need to be is this mechanism and culture around feedback. So making sure that you as a dashboard designer are always listening, always incorporating, and always repeating. And before we go into that a little bit more, I want to tell another story. So this was my favorite news story from 2016. The British government had commissioned a new polar research vessel. And they decided they were going to give the people a voice. And to name this polar research vessel, they decided to conduct an online poll. And of course, there were some really great, scholarly British names. I wrote them down because they're pretty great. The Shackleton, the Endeavour, the Falcon. These are really regal, strong names. But the internet, being the internet, did not pick one of those strong names. They picked Boaty McBoatface. Yeah. So the British government had to backtrack a little bit and say, well, we spent 300 million pounds on this vessel. I don't think we're going to call it Boaty McBoatface. Thank you, but no thank you. And they decided to go with the Sir David Attenborough. And I'm a huge Planet Earth fan, so great name. But the moral of the story is you can't really ask for feedback from your users and then cut it off when it's not the feedback you expected. And what we can translate that to from a dashboard perspective, is that asking for feedback and then not taking it or ignoring it is the best way to disenfranchise your users. If they provide feedback and you completely dismiss them, they're never going to do it again. And that is your most valuable asset for process improvement around these dashboards. So, establishing a framework and a culture for feedback. You want to make sure that you have a platform in place for continuous feedback. So in our case, we showed you it was that nice, easy form that was really easy to go to, type out your feedback, and then hit submit. So whatever it is, you need to make sure that you know what that mechanism is. You need to incorporate that feedback where you should. So listening to your users and making sure they feel like they're heard is not blindly accepting their recommendations. That could potentially be a disaster. But it's making sure that you're reviewing each of them, maybe in a team process, and saying this one actually makes a lot of sense and incorporating it, or saying this one doesn't make sense and here's why, and then providing that feedback back to your users. So regardless of what the outcome is, they feel like they had a voice and that their feedback was heard and appreciated. Respond regardless. So again, whether you accept it or not, you need to keep that channel of communication open with your users and thank them for providing that feedback. And then just because you do this once does not mean you're done. It is continuous. You're never done. You're always asking for feedback again and again and again, always trying to make these tools as best as they can be. So one thing I want to leave you with is this ridiculously simple model of great dashboards. So I'm going to tell you how to be as effective as possible with your dashboards. You ready? Step 1, build a great dashboard. Okay, easy as that, right? Step 2 is making sure all these components around a great dashboard are in place. And why I like this particular diagram is that your users can't get to your dashboard without going through all of this ancillary stuff, right? They can't interact with your dashboard before they get to marketing, or before they have a way to navigate to it, or before they have the information they need to know which tool to select, or before they have the training in place to interact with these tools. So make sure that all these ancillary pieces are in place so that when they get to that dashboard, they're not already upset and irritated with the tool. So with that, I'd like to thank you. I'm happy to take any questions now. Yes, ma'am.
How'd you do the feedback form? Was that a SharePoint form?
It was. So we initially just did a SharePoint form, and then eventually when we wanted to sort of pretty it up, we worked with our IT group, and they put some Angular JavaScript on top of it to make it a little bit more interactive. But you could do something as simple as a SharePoint list, where there's a form, they submit the feedback, and it's categorized in a feedback list.
All that navigation to that feedback forms, the subscriptions and stuff, this is on the SharePoint portal you have, not in the dashboards.
Correct.
Themselves, yes?
Correct. That's on the portal.
Why didn't you put those in the dashboards like links to?
So what we did was we didn't want to busy the dashboards up too much and have all this content in the actual tool. So we created links across the top that allowed them to get back to the portal, and that's where all that information was. And it kept the dashboards nice and neat. It kept the navigation consistent from one tool to the next, and they sort of always knew where to go for this information. Yeah, sorry. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take those now. Okay, thank you. Yes? Well, yep. So the question was, did we turn our frequently asked questions or our questions that we were receiving, the feedback we were receiving, into some sort of repository so that we weren't getting the same question over and over again? Our feedback list is actually visible. So every time a user submits feedback, they get to see all the requests that are in the queue and then what our response was. So we can say, we're working this request, or this request has been answered. So we make sure that our users see the feedback form and then they see everything that's come before it. It isn't. That's probably something we could do to be more effective, so that if users want to navigate that and say, I want to see everything related to bug fixes, they could click on a filter. Yes, sir?
What kind of scale did you, how many people saw the dashboard? Did you execute this process and did you reach the amount of people that you wanted to reach? Or was there still, was there a curve of user adoption on here? Or where are you and where do you want to be?
I think that's a great question. So with a company the size of Exxon, about 80,000 employees, I think we could always do better with penetration. But a lot of these tools, I think we've touched about 20,000 people with a lot of these tools. So we've had fairly good penetration. And again, it's all about not relaxing, right? Staying vigilant. So even though we've had really good success within sort of our SHE organization and sort of some of the ancillary groups, we can always do better about marketing broader, and we're continually trying to do that. Yes, sir? So that's a great question. So the question is, do we manage permissions further down, or can everybody see the dashboard of dashboards? So we actually, our dashboard of dashboards, we strategically decided that we only wanted to show the dashboards that contain data that was acceptable or approved to be consumed across the corporation. And that way a user didn't see a potential tool, click on it, and then get an access denied form, so that when they saw the thumbnail, they could actually get to the tool and consume it. Yes, sir? Mm-hmm.
And what I found helpful was actually using a tooltip on the info, and embed the info right on there. And it could be a full page unto itself, pops up with email links and everything else.
Yeah, that's a great point. So for those of you that didn't hear it, the comment was that we have this home button and this information button, and an additional layer of user experience that you can layer on that is using the tooltip, so that when they hover over it, they can see all the information they need, and they actually never have to leave the page that way. And when they hover over the home button, it says, this will take you back to Discovery on Demand. Don't click on this unless you're ready to go back home. So that's a great point. Thank you. So just to leave you with a couple things, please complete the session survey on your app. And then as promised, you can view and download the dashboard of dashboards here. So you can either use the bit.ly or the QRC to access that. And that's a package workbook, so you should be able to download that with all of the data and see how that was constructed. So with that, thank you all so much for coming, and I hope all of your trains find stations. Thank you very much.